Hello, Mr. Gitu. It's Monday, June 19th. This is Africa 54. A vote is underway in Mali following a constitutional referendum that the ruling military junta and regional powers say will pave the way to elections and a return to civilian rule. Analysts call for the international community to put pressure on the Chadian government to transition to civilian rule. And Monday marks the Juneteenth federal holiday in the United States when U.S. soldiers arrived in the island of Galveston, Texas, and informed slaves that they were free. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin in West Africa, where vote counting is underway in Mali following a constitutional referendum over the weekend that the ruling military junta and regional powers say will pave the way to elections and a return to civilian rule. Paul Ndiho has more.
Mali's ruling junta says the new constitution, which expands the powers of the military, will set the West African nation on a path to civilian rule. This is the first electoral test for the military junta, which has governed Mali since August 2020 coup that saw Colonel Assimi Goïta rise to power. He has vowed to return Mali to a civilian government in 2024. 8.4 million citizens were eligible to vote in the referendum on the proposed measures, fueling speculation that Goïta plans to run for president. Goïta was among the first to cast his ballot.
I am convinced this referendum will pave the way for a new Mali, a Mali Kura, a strong Mali, an efficient Mali, a Mali at the service of the population's well-being. I would also like to appeal to all Malians, whatever the outcome of this referendum, to join hands and form a sacred union around Mali.
As voters have flocked polling stations in and around the country. A team of observers from civil society groups backed by the European Union reported that there were only a few voting issues in the polling stations to which they were deployed. The new constitution will strengthen the role of the president, who will have the right to hire and fire the prime minister and cabinet members. The government will answer to the president, not parliament. It will also give an amnesty to those behind previous coups, reform the regulation of public finances, and force MPs and senators to declare their wealth. However, the reform has drawn vocal opposition from former rebels, imams, and political opponents. Influential religious organizations oppose the continuation of secularism enshrined in the current constitution. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
For more on Mali's referendum, I'm joined by my colleague Modibo Dembele, VOA Bambara Service Managing Editor. Modibo, welcome to Africa 54.
Welcome, Esther.
Tell us what's the latest on the vote count.
Right now, according to Mali Observation Election Mission, the latest, they are still counting, and according to what they call age, 27% of the vote has been counted, so it's still underway.
Some people say they were unable to vote because of insecurity in some areas. Do we know what's being done to allow them to vote and exercise their right?
In most of those areas, we have Kidal, we have also the center of Mali, such as Nyono, and also a little bit like the region Toua, Mauritania, Nara. In those areas, there reported some security incidents, especially jihadists took like the ballot boxes. Some of them, even sometimes, like election officials have been abducted, but later released. And right now, the government, I think, seem to continue counting the election, even though in those areas, people have not been able to conduct like their constitutional right.
And so what happens next if the vote passes?
If the vote passes, which means it's going to be a new area, that's what they're calling Bambara Malikura, which means like brand new Mali. So most likely, the current president transition will hand the power to a civilian transition in February 2024.
But then there's this rebel group that says no to the draft of the constitution. What do they want?
This is really one of the big issues in this upcoming election. That's why in Kidal, which is like extreme north of Mali, the referendum was not able to be held because the platform, which is one of the rebel group, they used to be called pro-government, and also the coordination of Azawad movement, they say no. And right now, I cannot tell you more than that, but we just know for a fact that referendum was not able to be done in those areas.
We know that ECOWAS has been trying to push for this, transition to civilian government. Do we know if there is goodwill from the military junta?
Based on what we have seen yesterday and based on the comment made by observer, we can say that because this is one of the first steps, and I know it was delayed a little bit, but hopefully, and based on what we have seen, I think this is a good process. If everything has been done as they say, I don't see why the power should not be handed over to a civilian government for upcoming months.
Modibo, thank you for following this for us.
Pleasure.
Modibo Dembele is VOA Bambara Service Managing Editor. Militants linked to the Islamic State have killed at least 37 people and abducted 8 in an attack on a secondary school in western Uganda near the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rachel Judah has more.
Militants linked to the Islamic State killed dozens in an attack on a secondary school in western Uganda. That's according to the military on Saturday. It added 6 others were abducted during the attack on Friday. Military personnel found the bodies when they arrived at the school near the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo, according to a defense spokesperson. The police and the military say the assailants, numbering about 5, burnt down a dormitory and looted food. Major General Adik Olum, the army's commander for western Uganda, said the group had spent 2 days in the town before the attack. He added that an unidentified youth had gone to the school to check its layout. According to a video posted on Twitter by the Daily Monitor newspaper, Olum told reporters the schoolboys tried to fight back and that the attackers had lit mattresses and locked the boys in their dorm. Police said the attackers fled towards Virunga National Park in the DRC. The Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, have been blamed for the attack. The ADF rebels launched their insurgency against President Museveni in the 1990s. The group was largely defeated by the Ugandan military, but remnants fled across the border into the vast jungles of eastern Congo. From there, they have since maintained their insurgency, perpetrating attacks on civilian and military targets in both Congo and Uganda.
Rachel Judah of Reuters filed that report. An international donors conference is set to begin in Geneva on Monday for Sudan, where a ceasefire was holding, but the UN says the humanitarian situation is worsening after 2 months of war. The conference comes midway through a 3-day ceasefire, which appeared to have brought calm to the capital Khartoum after the failure of earlier truces to ensure secure and aid corridors. Several Khartoum residents told AFP they had no airstrikes, artillery, or other fighting on Monday. Meanwhile, evacuees from Sudan arrived in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, on Sunday. As the 72-hour ceasefire began, one Sudanese evacuee, Shehat Abzaid Mohammed said food was in short supply in Omdurman, and the healthcare situation was catastrophic. The 20-year-old who fled Omdurman was among 165 Sudanese, Iraqi, and Syrian people the Iraqi foreign ministry said it had evacuated from Port Sudan on Sunday.
The situation is very hard, really hard. People could not even eat. There is no food. Wherever you go, there is no food. The health situation was catastrophic. The hospitals are at a standstill. Most of the people are hungry.
I have children with me, and the road was exhausting. 73 hours to get from the capital to Port Sudan, from Khartoum to the airport.
A total of 595 people have been evacuated by Iraq over 3 missions since the conflict in Sudan broke out
according to Iraqi Foreign Ministry spokesman Ahmed al-Sahaf. Analysts say the international community is reluctant to put pressure on the Chadian government to transition to civilian rule. In this report from Jamena, reporter Henry Wilkins speaks to one man arrested during protests against the junta and local politicians who say civilians need political representation to air their grievances against the state.
General Mohamed Idris Deby seized control of Chad in 2021. His father, the previous president, had just been killed during an attempt by state forces to put down a group of rebels in the north. Altogether, the Deby family's junta has ruled Chad for almost 33 years, and while an agreement was made in August last year to transition to civilian rule, experts say progress towards fulfilling the terms has been patchy. Dejona Avuxuma, the leader of the opposition Democratic Party, said he thinks citizens are losing patience and need political representation to air their grievances.
Everyone is waiting for the day when the anger starts to take hold of the whole population and civil society. I don't think I'm being too pessimistic. I think things could happen, especially as there's no safety valve.
In October, protesters took to the streets of Jamena, the capital. Around 70 were shot dead when the military opened fire on the crowds, while hundreds more were arrested. One man who said he was not a protester but was mistakenly arrested in an area of Jamena where protests were taking place asked VOA to withhold his identity for fear of government reprisals. He claims he was taken to an infamous penal colony in the Sahara Desert known as Koro Toro.
They drove with us all night until we reached our destination at 4 a.m. The person under me was already dead. It was horrible. People were dying on the way from thirst and hunger.
The man VOA spoke to was recently released, along with around 700 others, after a presidential pardon for October's protesters. Chad is one of the poorest countries in the world and has played an important part in international efforts to quell an insurgency of terrorists linked to the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in Africa's Sahel region, allying closely with France in particular. Some experts say this means the international community is reluctant to put pressure on Deby to transition to civilian rule. One analyst thinks there is not much the international community can do to force a transition to civilian rule, however.
The reality is that there's only so much they can do, short of intervening in the political affairs of another country, which, despite allegations of neocolonialism that are routinely thrown at the United States and France, the reality is that the US and France don't like to be that, don't want to be doing that.
Aside from Chad's rebellion in the north, in the south, there has been a recent flare-up of violence between herder and sedentary farmer communities, a common cause of instability across the Sahel region. One herder community leader in western Chad told VOA the government has been ineffective in keeping farmers off land designated for herder use.
If the farmers don't leave, there's no solution. It was the government itself that said they were going to move them. And so far, that hasn't happened. Instead, the farmers have built their huts here.
Analysts think violence is likely to spread from Sudan to Chad's eastern border region, but many also worry that with such a delicate balance of power, it could threaten to engulf the entire country unless more is done to address popular grievances. Chad's Minister for Reconciliation is yet to respond to a request for comment. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Jamena, Chad.
The Kremlin said on Monday it would continue to talk to a group of African countries seeking to mediate in the conflict with Ukraine, notably at a Russia-Africa summit next month. On Saturday, President Vladimir Putin gave the 7-country African delegation that met him in St. Petersburg a list of reasons why he believed many of their proposals were misguided, pouring cold water on a plan already largely dismissed by Kyiv. Senegalese President Macky Sall and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa led a delegation including leaders from Zambia, the Comoros and Egypt's Prime Minister that traveled to Kyiv on Friday and St. Petersburg on Saturday. They met both Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Putin. Ramaphosa presented Putin with a 10-point peace initiative from 7 African countries and told him it was time for Russia and Ukraine to start negotiations to end the conflict. For analysis on the Africa Peace Mission to Ukraine and Russia, I'm joined by Kenneth Mwenda, Professor of Law at the University of Western Cape, South Africa. Professor Mwenda, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther.
Very interesting story here and scenario. Your reaction first to President Ramaphosa's comment following their visit to Kyiv and Moscow that the mission was impactful.
Great observation. First of all, I should preface this by saying that we are looking at the contribution of African leaders to the process as opposed to the conflict itself. I think Ramaphosa is on solid ground. There's need for dialogue. This is in line with aspirations of the United Nations General Assembly that has passed resolution to end this war. So I don't think the 7 leaders that traveled departed from the spirit and intendment of the UN General Assembly resolution. If anything, they were fulfilling that resolution. So I know there have been some cynicism from critics that why are they going there with the stuff going on in Sudan? They could focus on Sudan. But, you know, you can have both a domestic internal policy as well as international relations policy beyond the continent. And the African Union also is on board. They're also looking at the issues in Sudan, for example. So an ambidextrous sort of approach, whilst you're using the left hand to deal with the Western world or international community or whatever you call it, there's the right hand which is working at home domestically.
But then on the other hand, Putin had a list of reasons, as we said, why he believes many of their proposals were misguided. What's your take on that?
The most important thing in negotiations, there's a science behind it, is not to focus on the position of either party, but the interests of the parties. That's very important. We can negotiate the position and shift the positions, but we can't shift the interests of the parties. So, and I think this was a good fact-finding mission for the African leaders who traveled there. They now understand the problem better. So it's a sort of a process, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. But we do expect that other members of the international community could emulate what the African leaders have done.
On the other hand, you know, President Zelensky was very hopeful. He said, he thought what the African mission proposal would freeze the war. But Putin, of course, has said, you know, the opposite. So what next?
Again, it's interesting because one other thing that we should remember, the history of the African position in many countries has been that we have friends in the international community, but we don't have enemies. That's the spirit of the non-aligned movement, you know, and that's, I believe, the spirit in which the 7 leaders were going to Kyiv and Moscow. They did not go there to take a side. They went there to find a solution or to offer proposals to end the war. I think this must be made very clear. Although during voting at the United Nations General Assembly, for example, South Africa, I think, abstained from voting. Zambia voted against Russia. But they went there as a united front, irrespective of their individual positions. And the united front is that they are not taking sides. They remain as mostly non-aligned states in the spirit of our forefathers, Kenneth Kaunda and Nyerere's non-aligned movement is still alive.
So do you feel that the African leaders achieved anything? What are they taking back to the continent?
One of the critical objectives of the mission, although the peace plan, the details of the peace plan have not been laid out fully to the public from the media reports that we have. But one of the core, I think, elements of the mission there was to de-escalate the conflict. And I think communication dialogue is the beginning of this process. And we do hope that other stakeholders can come in from either EU or so forth. But the most important thing is to remain impartial, neutral, and autonomous in the process. Because if you're invited in by any of the 2 parties, you will be seen as being biased. But they voluntarily went there in an impartial, neutral, and autonomous manner to see how they could help.
It couldn't have been said better, Professor
You're
Kenneth.
most welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Kenneth Mwenda is a professor of law at the University of Western Cape, South Africa. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Americans celebrate the newest holiday, Juneteenth, when U.S. soldiers informed slaves they were free. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. We're coming to you live from United States capital, Washington, D.C. Now, in other news, the United Nations is calling for the killers of Sudan West Darfur State Governor Hamis Abdullah Abakar to be held to account. Abakar was killed last week, hours after he made remarks critical of the Sudan Rapid Support Forces paramilitaries in a telephone interview with a Saudi TV channel. The United Kingdom on Monday announced a new sanction against the two rebel leaders from the violence-torn Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, Desire Londrama Jukpa and William Yakutumba. Jukpa heads the Cooperative for the Development of the Congo Codeco militia, while Yakutumba, an army deserter, is leader of the armed Mai Mai rebel group. Mali's unexpected demand for the departure of UN MINUSMA peacekeepers is raising fears the country could slide deeper into chaos amid an Islamist insurgency and the possible revival of a separatist uprising. It isn't clear how quickly the UN troops could leave following Mali's demand made on June 16th. Monday, June 19th, marks the Juneteenth federal holiday in the United States. The name comes from the day after the end of the U.S. Civil War in 1865, June 19th, when U.S. soldiers arrived in the island city of Galveston, Texas, and informed slaves that they were free. Slaves had already been freed in other parts of the South, but most slaves in Texas were kept in bondage until the army arrived. While the holiday is now celebrated nationwide, it has special significance to the people of Galveston. Greg Flackers has more.
The celebration of Juneteenth in Galveston, Texas began several days before the actual holiday with picnics, parades, and concerts. Juneteenth is a celebration of Black culture and its contributions to the culture at large. But its significance is rooted in its history, according to event organizer Sam Collins. He says a 460-square-meter mural in downtown Galveston honors General Gordon Granger, his mostly Black troops, and the people who were freed.
There were only about 1,200, a little over 1,000 enslaved people on the island. But after Juneteenth, the message spread from the island, and those 1,200 people plus the other 250,000 enslaved people in the state of Texas kept the oral history of what happened here in Galveston alive.
Juneteenth has a deep emotional connection for many African Americans, but some white people support it as well, like Ronnie Hall from Baytown, Texas.
Well, I think it may have started out for just Black people, but I think it's gotten bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
So you celebrate it too yourself?
Yeah, sure.
There were more people of all races at the island's beaches on the weekend than at Juneteenth events, but some residents and visitors enjoyed a Juneteenth parade. U.S. Army veteran Tawan Parsons came here from Louisiana for Juneteenth.
Well, it's important to remember what has happened, but don't let ourselves be defined by the past. Utilize this time to not only celebrate the freedom that was achieved by the people here in Galveston, but to remind ourselves to look forward to our continued freedom.
Parsons worries about attempts by some politicians to hide aspects of history that they find disturbing, including slavery. Collins says knowledge of historic events like Juneteenth could reduce political polarization and help the country.
We're responsible for repairing the foundation of this country by telling the truth and telling the true history in those stories, because the only way we're going to heal is to tell the truth.
Collins says some people think educators promote guilt rather than patriotism with their emphasis on slavery, but he argues that a truthful depiction of history will make the country stronger. Greg Flakus for VOA News, Galveston, Texas.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, thanks for watching.
To me, making Juneteenth a federal holiday wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a statement of fact for this country, to acknowledge the origin of the original sin of slavery. To understand the war was never fought over it. It wasn't just about the Union, but it was most fundamentally about the country and freedom. To remember the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't just a document. It captured the essence of freedom that galvanized the country. It proved that some ideas are more powerful. They can't be denied. It's a reminder that the promise of America is we all are created equal in the image of God, and we deserve to be treated equally throughout our entire lives.
Lift every voice and sing of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory